When he discovers that his father is working on a mission to stop Godzilla from destroying humanity, two siblings decide to team up to help him, but they end up trapped in the world of the Titans and have to fight for survival. Today we're going to recap the series, Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, from 2023. During an expedition to Skull Island in 1973, cryptozoologist William Rondon saw his entire team of soldiers destroyed and, before any monsters came to get him, he recorded a message for his son. After the recording, William is chased by a giant spider and runs until he reaches a cliff. To ensure that his tapes are not destroyed by the monster, the scientist decides to throw them into the ocean and bravely awaits the moment of his elimination. However, before the spider could reach him, a huge crab appeared and attacked the creature. During the battle, the two titans end up falling into the ocean and, luckily, William manages to survive another day. 40 years later, some fishermen are working on the high seas when they catch the bag containing the scientist's camera in one of their fishing nets. In 2015, Kate Rondon arrived in Tokyo and, before getting off the plane, all the passengers have to undergo decontamination. In this way, the authorities claim that they will be able to prevent another monster attack. Kate has already survived an attack and the memories of that day terrify her from time to time. Even so, she tries to get on with her life as normal and has gone to Japan to sort out some family business, since her father perished recently. When she arrives at Hiroshi's old apartment, the young woman finds numerous photos of him with other people on the wall and soon discovers that her father had another family in Japan. During a conversation with Kentaro and his mother, Kate realizes that they were also being deceived by Hiroshi and had no idea that the man had a family in the United States. Devastated to learn that her father was nothing but a liar, Kate decides to leave and hands over the keys to her family. At Monarch's headquarters a few decades earlier, three scientists visit a contaminated area and Keiko discovers that, contrary to media reports, the place has no radiation at all. The trio then distributes some bombs at strategic points in the area and, after the explosion, discovers that there is something hidden underneath the city. Going underground, Keiko, William and Lee find dozens of Muto eggs in a kind of nursery. Keiko is determined to get a sample of genetic material and uses a rope to get down there, so Lee decides to accompany her. After leaving the apartment, Kate walks through the streets talking to her mother on the phone, but suddenly the signal is interrupted and an alarm makes everyone run to the evacuation area. There, she meets Kentaro and Emiko and remembers the day Godzilla attacked San Francisco. Kate was inside a school bus and couldn't get all the children out before it fell off the bridge. This memory causes the young woman to panic and Emiko tries to calm her down until everyone has been released from hiding. Kentaro then invites his half-sister to visit their late father's laboratory. Within the first few minutes, Kate finds a hidden safe and manages to open it. Inside, she finds William Rondon's bag and numerous cassette tapes. In an attempt to discover the contents of those tapes, Kentaro goes after his friend May and the young woman manages to decrypt the message contained on them. In doing so, Monarch's security system issues an alert and Collins contacts Tim to inform him of what has happened. However, it was not possible to locate the exact address where the decryption software was used, so the agents will have to scour the whole of Tokyo during the search. Upon checking the archives, Kate and Kentaro discover that their father was involved with the Monarch Company and was hiding much more than they could have imagined. The young woman says that 5 days after the attack in San Francisco, Hiroshi showed up and gave her 2 plane tickets so that she and her mother could leave the city safely. However, after that, he said goodbye and told them he couldn't accompany them. The following week, Kate and her mother received a call from the state police and discovered that Hiroshi's plane had disappeared in a storm in Alaska. However, the wreckage of the aircraft was never found. Upon hearing this, Kentaro tries to defend his father and claims that he wasn't a monster. According to him, Hiroshi must have had some reason for doing what he did. Among the images found in that archive, Kate identifies a photo of her grandmother inside a large footprint and wonders what she was doing there. The truth is that Keiko was a brilliant scientist who met a tragic end while trying to collect DNA samples from the Muto nest. Before the accident, Lee Shaw was sent by the army to escort Dr. Keiko Miura on a mission to investigate the existence of a possible source of radiation located in the Philippines. While setting up her equipment in the middle of the forest, Keiko hears the sound of footsteps coming from the middle of the forest and tries to warn the lieutenant. However, Lee has already realized that someone is approaching and hides in order to catch him by surprise. Suddenly, William Rondon appears and introduces himself as a veteran of the US Navy. The man reveals that he is on a hunting expedition and Keiko discovers that they are both looking for the same thing. After discovering the truth about his father, Kentaro tried to carry on with his life as normal, but the idea that Hiroshi wasn't who he thought he was began to bother him deeply. After work, the young man decides to pay another visit to his father's office and takes out his anger by destroying everything he sees. He then finds a bunch of keys and manages to open a drawer full of documents. In this way, Kentaro finds out about his grandmother's mission in the Philippines. At this point, Kate is already at the airport waiting for her flight home when she is approached by Tim. The man reveals that he works for Monarch and is there looking for Kate's father's files. Frightened, the young woman attacks him and tries to flee, but ends up being captured by Duvall and locked inside a car. When Tim puts a black bag over her head, Kate becomes desperate and starts struggling, which causes the driver to lose control of the vehicle and cause an accident. Luckily, Kate manages to escape unharmed and quickly runs away before Tim can find her. She then goes to the police station and tells them that she has almost been captured, but the officer says he can't help her and recommends that she go and talk to the American embassy. Furious, Kate leaves and walks to May's house. When she gets there, she discovers that the girl has also been discovered and Monarch agents have broken into her house. However, she manages to hide and helps Kate escape without her presence being discovered. At that moment, Kentaro is at home with his mother going through an album of old family photos. Emiko then tells him that Hiroshi's mother perished when he was still a child and he was only 18 when his father was eliminated in Vietnam. So his uncle Lee was the only relative he had, but something happened and they ended up drifting apart. Suddenly, the doorbell rings and Tim bursts into the apartment demanding that Kentaro hand over the files he stole. Realizing that her son is in trouble, Emiko distracts the two agents and says that Kentaro will get the files. However, the truth is that this is just an excuse for the young man to escape. On discovering that he is Hiroshi's son, Tim goes after him and Kentaro goes to find May. During their expedition, Keiko thinks it's a good idea to rely on William's company and knowledge, but Lee doesn't approve of this decision, so the woman decides to dismiss him. When the lieutenant leaves, she and William continue on their way alone through the forest and follow a map that, with a bit of luck, will lead them to the organizations that William has named MUTOs. After a few hours of walking, the pair find a ship and William informs her that it sank 200 miles from Pearl Harbor in 1943. The most curious thing is that this base is 8,000 kilometers away, so how that ship ended up in the middle of the forest is a mystery. The scientists then decide to investigate what's inside. At this point, William finds a box containing his old belongings and Keiko discovers that her partner was on that ship when it sank. The man says that that night they hit something in the water, but thought it was a Japanese ship. Minutes later, the ship sank and only he survived. Arriving in another compartment of the ship, the former sailor finds the bodies of his former colleagues covered in goo and both are terrified. They quickly run outside and find a huge amount of fresh goo dripping down the walls. While looking for the exit, the couple hear some frightening noises and then discover that they are under attack. During his escape, William ends up being hit by the monster's claws and is trapped under the rubble. Just then, Lee appears and helps Keiko free her fellow scientist. The three of them then run out of the ship and begin to be chased by a giant bat that was living inside the vessel. When Kentaro finds Kate and May, he discovers that they are planning to run away and asks for the girls' help to find Lee Shaw. The next day, the trio manage to visit the colonel and he is happy to finally meet Hiroshi's children. Suspicious, the man asks how those youngsters found him and Kentaro reveals that it was his mother who revealed his location. While Lee exchanges information with the two siblings, May looks around and finds a camera hidden in a bush. When they question the old man about what that place is, they discover that the monarch has imprisoned the colonel in that facility. Immediately, the trio decide to leave, but Lee says that they will continue to be pursued, so he offers to accompany them on a journey to find out what really happened to Hiroshi, as the colonel believes that the monarch is involved in his disappearance. After removing his anklet, the old man runs to the minivan that Kentaro rented to get there and drives quickly out of the shelter, before the security guards can catch up with him. 2 years after surviving the Titan attack in the Philippines, Lee, William and Keiko invited a group of military personnel to see the footprint they had imprinted from a muddy field in Indonesia. Their goal is to get the resources they need to study this sea creature and make sure it doesn't put humanity at risk. After a long conversation with General Puckett, they get the funding they need and 70 kilos of uranium to lure the monster to the surface, since it feeds on radiation. To find out what happened to Hiroshi, the first step is to investigate what he was doing in Alaska, and May tries to find some information in the data she has scanned. When she discovers that her father actually worked for the monarch, Kate is shocked and disgusted to learn that it was her own grandparents who founded the organization. As they are on a ferry on their way to Korea, Kate decides to go out to cool off and May does the same. However, she is followed by Kentaro, who asks for forgiveness for getting his friend into trouble. When the whole group gets together again, Lee says that they need to get rid of those files, because they'll be in trouble if any guards decide to search that bag during the immigration process. However, Kentaro doesn't agree with this decision and questions why they are going to South Korea when his father has disappeared in Alaska. The colonel then explains that he needs the help of an old Korean friend to get to Alaska. So Kentaro decides to get rid of the tapes, as he doesn't want them to end up in the hands of the Monarch agents. As they don't have passports, the quartet are stopped at customs and taken to the police station. However, before they get into the car, Do-ho attacks the guard and hugs his old friend. Then they all get into a car to drive away. That day, Natalia arrives in Japan and says that Tim is in trouble for acting without Monarch's authorization. The agency didn't know that he had gone to Japan after those tapes, and the woman claims that the contents recorded on them won't help prevent another Titan attack. Just then, Duvall receives a phone call informing her that Lee is in South Korea. Facial recognition showed that he and the 3 others had been detained in the port of Pohang. But somehow they managed to escape. So Natalia allows Tim and Duvall to take a plane and assemble a tactical team to find the colonel. What they don't realize is that, at this point, Lee and the others are leaving for a trip to Alaska aboard a plane piloted by Do-ho. Months later, when everything is ready for the attack, Keiko and Will are furious to learn that the army intends to use the 70 kilos of uranium to eliminate the Titan before the scientists even have a chance to study it. Dozens of people gather on an island to await the arrival of the giant monster, and everyone is surprised when Godzilla appears. When she sees him, Keiko despairs because she doesn't want the animal to be eliminated by the military. So Lee goes to talk to the general and tries to convince him to back down. However, instead of listening to Lee's advice, the man orders his subordinates to start the detonation, and Keiko tries to destroy the bomb. However, Lee runs after her and manages to stop her, because he knows that the woman will suffer serious consequences if she opposes the army. After the explosion, Keiko despairs and can't forgive herself for having contributed to the elimination of that magnificent creature who, in reality, didn't really perish. William is trying to console her when Lee shows up with the news that they have just received a blank check to fund their research to find out if there are other creatures like that scattered around the world. However, Keiko says she will only take part in new expeditions if Lee promises not to tell his superior about the existence of new Titans if they are found. In the middle of the flight to Alaska, Do-ho is surprised by a storm and the plane begins to experience turbulence. Lee decides to fly, as he has experience of flying during storms. With the colonel in charge, the group manages to land safely and walks through the snow until Kentaro finds the wreckage of the plane his father was on. However, only the pilot's body is inside the aircraft, and Kate begins to have a glimmer of hope that her father might be alive. A few meters away, Do-ho spots a tent and everyone rushes over to investigate whether anyone is living there. While searching the site, Kate and Kentaro identify their father's handwriting on a map and hug each other when they get confirmation that Hiroshi survived the crash. Suspecting that the crash never happened, Do-ho starts looking for evidence to prove his theory and discovers that the plane managed to land safely, just as he suspected. While observing the aircraft, the man spots some marks and soon realizes that the vehicle has been attacked by a Titan. He immediately runs to the plane and the monster appears. Do-ho then tries to attack it, but his body ends up being frozen along with the plane. The creature then runs after the 4 survivors, but they manage to hide inside a cave and lose him. In an attempt to find a safe place to shelter before sunset, the quartet aimlessly walks through the snowy mountains until Kentaro reveals that he saw a cabin from the airplane window. With no other choice, the rest of the group decides to follow him, but the hours pass and no shelter is found. Everyone is already exhausted when Kate spots a strong blue light and Lee begins to think that it's coming from a village. So they decide to change course and walk towards that location, but Kentaro says that the facility he saw is much closer and decides to go there alone. At this point, the group splits up with the promise that whoever manages to find help first will send a rescue team. Meanwhile, at Monarch headquarters in the United States, Natalia receives a call from one of the scientists working for the agency, and Barnes reveals that she has received a signal from a radiation source coming from Alaska. The woman reveals that the last time anyone saw a sign like that was the day before the attack that took place in San Francisco a year ago. A few hours later, during the night, a snowstorm hits and May can't walk because her legs are almost frozen. The same thing happens to Kentaro, who starts raving minutes before he loses his strength and falls to the ground. In the United States, Natalia reveals that one of her scientists has identified an eruption of gamma rays being emitted in Alaska, and these signals are identical to those identified in San Francisco. At that moment, Tim decides to speak out and claims that Lee Shaw is involved in this, because it's too much of a coincidence that something like this happened just after he escaped from prison. After a long walk, Lee, Kate and May return to exactly where they were when they left, and the colonel realizes that they are walking in a circle thanks to the effect the Titans are having on their surroundings. As May can no longer walk, the trio decide to camp in the tent and Kate tries to warm her up. Even in the snow, Lee manages to light a fire and they start to warm up when a huge crack forms in the ground. Immediately, the trio realize that they are dealing with a titan and get up to flee. However, the creature suddenly stops moving and appears beneath the fire. When it is hit by the fire, the monster emits a blue light and disappears. Seeing this, Lee discovers that the creature is attracted to heat and its body is the hottest thing on that mountain of ice. So he sets up an escape plan which consists of building a giant bonfire and, while the titan feeds, they intend to escape. Knowing that Mei is injured, the colonel promises to carry her, but the young woman knows that sooner or later her friends will have to abandon her if they want to survive. Suddenly, Kentaro hears his father's voice and gets up to find him, but Hiroshi walks straight past him and the young man realizes that the image was created by his own mind. At this point, he gathers the strength to keep walking and finally finds the facility he was looking for. Inside, he spots some telephones and tries to use them to call for help. Meanwhile, Lee prepares to light the fire and throws fuel on his friend Duho's body so that he can set it on fire. But before the man could light the fire, the monster appeared and began chasing Kate and Mei. During their escape, they realize that a helicopter is approaching and try to attract its attention. Just then, Lee is trying to find the lighter to light the fire and an explosion knocks him away. After getting up, he runs towards the aircraft and everyone is surprised to discover that Kentaro is alive. Fortunately, the young man was able to call for help and, thanks to him, the rest of the group was saved. While Mei receives medical attention, Kentaro reveals that his father was at the facility and fixed the radio before he arrived. This information gives the two siblings even more hope that Hiroshi is alive. Upon landing, the team discovers that Tim and Duvall are there waiting for them. After being rescued from Alaska, Kate and her friends end up being arrested by Monarch agents and Duvall tries to bribe Mei into betraying her friend's trust. However, the young woman doesn't accept the deal, so the agents decide to release the three young people in order to keep an eye on them from a distance. After picking up their passports, the trio walks to the airport and Mei decides to take a plane back to Tokyo, but Kentaro doesn't agree with this decision. In an attempt to find out if her father is still alive, Kate and Kentaro convince Mei to help them continue their investigation. Meanwhile, Lee Shaw remains trapped in his cell and receives a visit from Natalia Verdugo, the deputy director of the Monarch. The woman is there looking for information about what was in the files that were hidden in Hiroshi's office, but Lee refuses to give her any information. Upon arriving in the United States, Kate hitches a ride with a friend who takes her home. When she meets her mother, the young woman introduces Kentaro and reveals that he is her half-brother. At this point, Caroline discovers that her husband had another family in Japan. While her new friends go to their room, Kate talks to her mother and takes the keys to her father's office to see if he's hiding anything else. With the help of James and Caroline, the youngsters manage to cross the barrier created by the military and enter the Red Zone, where the attack by Godzilla took place. The trio will have the whole night to investigate and Caroline says she'll be back in the morning to pick them up. As she walks through the wreckage, Kate remembers the good times she had there before Godzilla appeared to destroy everything. During the investigation, the trio come across a group of armed soldiers and have to hide. When they were about to be caught, Kentaro threw a packet of snacks to attract the cats that live there and managed to lose the military. The soldiers then leave and the trio continue their journey, but it isn't long before they are spotted by another group of soldiers and immediately run for cover in the subway. During the escape, Kate starts having flashbacks to the day of the attack and her friends have to calm her down. With the help of Mei and Kentaro, she manages to move on, but the three of them end up trapped in a cave created by the rubble. While Mei tries to calm Kate down, Kentaro sets off in search of a passage and discovers that all he has to do is follow the cats to find the way out. Minutes later, the trio finally arrive at Hiroshi's office and start looking for some confidential information about Monarch. However, all the youngsters find is a map of the world showing the exact route Hiroshi took. Upon finding this evidence, Kate and Kentaro become even more convinced that their father is alive and, after picking up the map, they walk to the place where they agreed to meet Caroline and James. Luckily, the trio made it out of the mission unscathed and, on returning home, Kate tells her mother that her father didn't perish in Alaska, as they believed. Now that she knows Hiroshi is alive, the young woman promises that she will find him, but Mei decides to betray her friends and calls Duvall, because all she wants is to go home. That afternoon, Lee is being transported to a maximum security military prison, but Duvall decides to intervene in his superior's plans and attacks the men who have been tasked with transporting the prisoner. After getting rid of the guards, she frees Lee, because in the short time she has been with him Duvall has realized that the old man has much more information than the best scientists currently on the planet. The truth is that Lee, together with Keiko and Bill Rhonda, Kate and Kentaro's grandparents, was the founder of Monarch and tried to share his theories with the organization. However, he was labeled insane, as was Hiroshi, because anyone who disagrees with the monarch is accused of insanity. When asked why she was helping Lee escape, Duvall reveals that her sister was eliminated during the attack in Japan and that's why she joined the monarch. Her main objective in joining the organization was to prevent the Titans from attacking again, and Duvall believes that Lee is the only one who can do this. When she arrives home, Kate sees Lee and Duvall sitting on the sofa in the living room, and they both say they've gone there to prevent an even bigger attack from happening. According to Lee, Hiroshi is also trying to prevent this from happening, so the group needs to find him to help in this mission. However, Kate and Kentaro are the only ones who know where their father is, so they will have to guide them through the desert. On the way, Mei talks about the deal she made with Duvall, and the woman promises to send her home as soon as Hiroshi is found. After a few hours of travel, the group arrives at the place indicated on the map where the scientist is supposed to be. Looking through the binoculars, Kate and Kentaro spot their father and immediately start calling for him. However, instead of being happy with his children's presence, Hiroshi despairs and orders them to leave. At that moment, Lee realizes what is happening and says that his team needs to get out of there. Soon after, a helicopter approaches the scene and Tim is on board, having been sent to look for the fugitives. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake and a Titan emerges from within the earth, causing Lee and his team to roll off the cliff. Seeing Godzilla up close once again, Kate goes into shock and, at that moment, the buried animal rises. Accidentally, the propellers of Tim's helicopter touch the scales of the giant lizard and the aircraft crashes to the ground. Luckily, instead of attacking the humans, Godzilla turns his back and walks away. So Lee doesn't think twice before deciding to go after the creature. But the three youngsters refuse to accompany him. Now that they've seen their father with their own eyes, Kentaro and Kate intend to go after him, since Hiroshi fled before the Titan showed up. Luckily, they are only 10 kilometers away from the city, so if they walk without taking a break, they will be able to reach civilization before nightfall. Along the way, Mei reveals that it was because of her that Lee and Duvall were able to find them, as she gave away their location. The young woman says that she did this because she got mixed up with the wrong people in the past and had to flee to Japan, so the monarch promised that if she helped them, she could return home and have her family back. Believing in this promise, Mei decided to betray her friends and, on discovering the truth, Kate is very disappointed, as she considered her a great friend. In the morning, the trio decide to buy a ticket back to the United States, as Kentaro no longer wants to go after his father, since Hiroshi has abandoned them for the second time. After buying her tickets, Mei goes to the toilet and ends up being found by the people she has spent years trying to hide from. Noticing that the young woman has been in the bathroom for a long time, Kate decides to check if she's okay and finds Mei's coat on the floor. At that moment, she realizes that her friend has been taken and walks through the airport to look for her. Suddenly, the two siblings meet Tim, who was the only survivor of the helicopter crash. The man claims to have gone to the desert to look for Lee, and Kate promises to take Tim to him. But first, he'll have to help them find Mei. By now, Lee and Duvall had arrived in Alaska with a group of soldiers and taken control of Post 88. The group gives the employees permission to leave, but they all decide to stay, except for Barnes, who manages to sneak out and calls Natalia to tell her what happened. While investigating Mei's whereabouts, Kate and Kentaro discover that she was using a false identity to protect herself and that her real name is Cora. With Tim's help, the two siblings manage to get to the house where their friend lived before fleeing to Japan and talk to her mother and sister. Both are surprised to discover that Cora was living in Japan, as the young woman left home 2 years ago and hasn't been heard from since. So that the family doesn't know that their friend is missing, Kate and Kentaro say that they are her friends and were passing through town, so they decided to stop by Cora's house in the hope of finding her. As the trio leave, Tim sees his sister Kate leaving the house and decides to follow her. Minutes later, they arrive at a garage and Mei attacks them. The young woman believes that the trio are part of the organization that is after her sister, so Kentaro decides to tell her the truth and asks for her help to find out where Cora is. Concerned for her sister's safety, Mei decides to name the company where she worked and tells them that Cora was running away from them for some reason. Since she couldn't use her passport to avoid being traced, she decided to assume the identity of her younger sister, and that's how she managed to stay hidden. After obtaining this information, the trio promised to find Cora and decide to go after the company. The truth is that, after being hired by Brenda to take on a senior position at T, Cora became suspicious of the confidentiality of the information the company was hiding and decided to investigate. In doing so, she discovered that the organization she worked for carried out cruel tests on animals and deleted all the data that scientists had taken years to collect. As he approaches the T headquarters, Tim sets off an evacuation alarm created by Monarch to warn people that a possible Titan attack is about to take place. Immediately, chaos ensues and people start looking for shelter, but Brenda soon realizes that this is just a distraction for Cora's friends to get in. So she decides to make a deal with the young woman. If Cora agrees to be her spy to gather information about the Titans, she will have her record cleared and will be able to return home. What's more, she will be able to work for that company again, earning an excellent salary. Even though she knows that she could be arrested if she doesn't accept this deal, Cora decides to refuse the offer and, when she meets her friends, she tells them that she won't be able to accompany them. On leaving the building, the two siblings are taken away by Monarch agents and Natalia lectures Tim for having set off Titan's alarm in vain. During the discussion, Kate proposes a new deal. She knows that Cora is in trouble, so she asks Natalia to help her clear the air and, in return, promises to help her stop Lee. Then, just as Brenda was about to call the police, her receptionist alerts her to Natalia's arrival and Cora finally gets her freedom back. After going home and giving her family a hug, the young woman goes to meet her friends and tells them that she wants to finish the mission with them. Meanwhile, in Alaska, a new rift is forming and Lee is enlisting the help of his men to try and destroy it in order to prevent new monsters from reaching the surface. With the help of some explosives, the group manages to accomplish their mission and the portal is permanently closed. Meanwhile, in America, Tim takes the three youngsters to see the official Monarch headquarters and Natalia reveals that Lee and his people caused a huge explosion in Alaska, reducing the gamma-ray emissions from there to zero. The big problem is that if another explosion like this happens, it's possible that the Titans will become furious and unite to destroy a new city. So they have to find Lee before that happens. Since Hiroshi's map was stolen by Lee, the trio have no idea where the next attack will be, so they decide to rummage through old files in search of clues. During the search, Kate discovers that Keiko, her grandmother, died in Kazakhstan, a victim of the Titan attack. This is one of the places where the gamma-ray emissions are coming from, so the group believes that Lee is heading there. As a young man, he was completely in love with Keiko, but the woman chose to marry Bill. Even so, Lee has never been able to forget her and wants to avenge his beloved's elimination. In addition to Tim and the three youngsters, Natalia sends a small team of specialized professionals to accompany them and Kate manages to convince the soldiers not to use brute force. She believes that Lee will be willing to listen to them, as Kate and Kentaro are the closest thing he has to a family. During the search, Tim and his team start looking through the wreckage of an old nuclear power plant and the agent is amazed to discover that the level of radiation present there is decreasing exponentially. After the collapse that destroyed the headquarters, the site was supposed to remain uninhabitable for at least 1,000 years. This means that something is absorbing all that radiation. While walking around the site, the group comes across dozens of giant insect exoskeletons which, luckily, are empty. The problem is that the reason these animals have changed skin is because they are even bigger and could appear at any moment. After a few minutes of walking, the team comes across a large hole which is actually a portal to the underground world where the Titans live. Lee's plan consists of trying to close that passage with the dozens of explosives that have been planted in the walls. When one of the Monarch agents was about to try to defuse the bombs, Duvall and her men showed up and managed to stop her. Lee then arrives on the scene and calls Kate in for a chat in which he reveals that there is a whole world hidden down there. The old man believes that Godzilla doesn't want to hurt humans. All the creature wants is to keep the two worlds apart so that his kind can be safe. Lee's plan is to seal off the world from the monsters so that they can live in peace, and in order to do this, he has to destroy all the portals. However, Monarch believes that these explosions could further irritate the Titans and put the lives of all humanity at risk. Even knowing this risk, Lee intends to continue with his plan, because that's what Keiko wanted to do. Suddenly, an earthquake begins to cause the cave to collapse and the detonators are activated. While trying to escape, Cora ends up falling into the portal and Kate rushes to help her. Just then, a giant cockroach appears and Lee tries to save the girl, but they both also end up falling underground and an explosion destroys the passage. After the cave collapse, Kentaro was seriously injured, but luckily he was found and Natalia took him to Tokyo with Tim, who was also injured. When he wakes up, the young man discovers that his sister and Cora didn't manage to escape, as well as Lee, who became a victim of the explosives he planted himself. This is what Natalia and all the members of the Monarch believe, but the truth is that both Lee and the girls managed to survive the fall and are now in danger of being eliminated by electrical currents that are spread throughout the forest. After escaping, Lee reveals that after a crack closes, it leaves behind some kind of electrical charge and this affects the ground. The reason he knows this is because Lee was once down there and now he needs to find Kate with Cora's help. Shortly after Kiko's elimination, Lee underwent an experiment led by Bill and was accidentally sent to the world of monsters. For several years, Bill believed that his experiment had been a failure, but sometime later Lee was rescued. The curious thing is that his appearance hadn't changed and he remained young, while Hiroshi, who was a child when they last saw each other, had already become a grown man. After being discharged from hospital, Kentaro returns home with his mother and reveals that he feels guilty about his sister's perishment. The young man says that he should have been sent to the world of the Titans with her, because he believes he had the role of protecting her. Despite everything that has happened, Kentaro believes that Kate and Korra may still be alive and decides to go looking for them, even though he knows that Natalia will never send Monarch agents to help him on this rescue mission. When she analyzes all the cracks that are still open, Barnes notices that there is a pattern of gamma-ray emissions. While trying to figure out which portal will open next, the woman realizes that there is someone on the other side trying to send a message and she needs to figure out how to decode it. After returning to the surface, Lee spent some time under observation, as Monarch agents were trying to understand what had happened to him. However, the man only agreed to talk to Hiroshi and told him everything that had happened when he arrived in the underground world. While Lee was trying to contact the base to ask for help, the rest of the team began a reconnaissance mission and suddenly a monster appeared. As well as escaping from the creature, the soldiers had to deal with local phenomena that they didn't understand, and everyone, except Lee, ended up being eliminated. After this attack, the only thing he remembers is being able to return to the surface. However, when he heard this story, Hiroshi thought Lee was going mad, just like his parents, and had him committed to a military nursing home. While Lee and Korra search for Kate, Kentaro is rummaging through his father's office looking for information on how to rescue them. Suddenly, Hiroshi appears and has a brief argument with his son. At this point, Kentaro blames him for abandoning his family and reveals that Kate is eliminated. Desperate, Hiroshi refuses to accept the truth, but Kentaro says that it was because the girl wanted to find her father more than anything. What they don't realize is that Kate is alive in the underworld, and when she wakes up from her accident, she is almost attacked by a Titan boar. Luckily, the animal has no intention of hurting her and walks away after sniffing her. However, seconds later, it returns and runs towards her, but Kate ends up being saved by none other than her grandmother. Without realizing that she is facing her granddaughter, Keiko tries to calm her down and Kate asks for her help in finding her friends. When asked why he was in Alaska, Hiroshi reveals that he intended to use the gamma-ray emitter as bait to attract a Titan, but didn't know it was Godzilla who was there. His goal in doing this was to open a new rift to prove his theory that there is a portal in the human world that leads to the world of monsters. According to Hiroshi, he needed to do this to prove that his parents weren't crazy, because that was the only way he could get the Monarch's support to seal off the monster world once and for all. The scientist's main mission is to prevent more people from dying, so he enlists the help of his son to finish his research and find a way for monsters and humans to coexist. While trying to think of a way to tell Keiko the truth, Kate finds Korra and the two friends hug. Seeing his beloved for the first time in decades, Lee introduces himself, but remains hidden behind a tree so she can't see him. Before allowing the woman to see his current appearance, Lee explains that, in the human world, they are already in 2015, which makes no sense to Keiko, as she believes she has only been down there for 57 days. When she finds out that all the people she loved are already eliminated, Keiko starts to cry and regrets all the time she lost down there. At that moment, Lee approaches her to try to console her, but Keiko asks about Hiroshi. Then Kate reveals that her father is well and the scientist learns that she already has a granddaughter. Meanwhile, at Monarch headquarters, Tim tries to convince Natalia to respond to a request for help that was actually sent by Keiko. Believing that Lee and the girls are trying to get in touch, Tim resigns and tries to find another way to rescue them. That night, he arranges to meet Kentaro to break the news, and when he discovers that Kate and Korra may still be alive, the young man decides to ask his father for help in bringing them back. After everything that's happened, Hiroshi knows that Monarch won't help them, but Tim has a second card up his sleeve. Along the way, the group finds the capsule that Lee left behind when he escaped from that world and decides to try to use it to return to the surface. Before turning on the machine, Lee connects the cables to have enough energy for the journey and uses the gamma-ray emitter to attract a Titan that will open the rift. Suddenly, a giant bat approaches and attacks the capsule. Just then, one of the power cables disconnects and Lee decides to go out and reconnect them. In doing so, he is completely unprotected and the Titan approaches to devour him. Just as the man was about to be attacked, Godzilla steps through the portal and the bat decides to attack him. Despite being much bigger than his enemy, the lizard ends up being wounded by him, but fights back with his atomic breath. After immobilizing his opponent, Godzilla tears off one of his wings and throws him towards the portal. Suddenly, the capsule begins to be sucked into the rift and Lee rushes in to try and save himself. However, he can't get inside in time and, after saying goodbye to Keiko, the old man ends up being thrown away. Heartbroken, Keiko tightens her belt and, alongside Kate and Cora, manages to return to the human world. After leaving the capsule, the trio are met by a group of soldiers who have apparently been waiting for them to arrive. When he sees Kate and Cora, Kentaro runs to hug them and Hiroshi is relieved to discover that his daughter is in fact alive. Immediately, he recognizes his mother and Keiko finally has the chance to reunite with her son. She asks forgiveness for all the time they lost and, after the emotional reunion, Brenda shows up to redirect the victims to the medical ward. As Monarch refused to finance the rescue, Tim had no choice but to make a deal with the T and Kate discovers that many things have changed in the 2 years she has been missing. The truth is that the place where they are is a research station on Skull Island, Kong's reign. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more series recaps. See you next time.